Hi, this is S.G. Brownlow with Adept Psychology, and I'm back for the third and final video in this series. If you've watched the other two, then you know that the first one is about the two big questions that everybody has to answer. Who am I, and what is the world about? The second one is about how we answer those questions with our brains, with our guts, with our hearts, or with a pure sensation, with our sex organs. In this video, I want to talk about the two kinds of therapists that we typically see. And if you look at just the codes on the MBTI, they look like they should be very similar, but in fact, if you've been following my logic up to now, then you realize that they're very, very different. And so I'm just going to call them right now type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is very rare in the population. It's about 1% of the population. And type 2 is also fairly rare. It's only about maybe 3% of the population. It's a little less rare than type 1. But what makes these two types so rare, first of all, most people in the culture, probably in the world, are extroverted, and both of these types are not. They're both introverts. Second, most people are reliant on either their brains or their sensations. And for one or the other of the two questions, they either answer who they are or what the world is about through thinking and through sensing. Neither of these uses either of those in a very major way. Type 1 person identifies with their gut, and they understand the world through their heart. Now, if you think about what I said in the last video, that means that what they identify with is getting things done, but getting things done in a very simple way. It's different than everybody else's, but it doesn't take a lot of risks. It stays within their story, but they get a lot done because they develop a very simple plan and they follow it very exactly. They don't deal, typically unless something very bad happens to them early, they don't deal with a lot of anxiety through their lives, because even though they realize that they're different and that creates some problems with other people and not feeling understood, in general, they figure out how to advance their agenda with other people. And they do that with their heart. As I said, your heart is about relationships. And so they're very good at forming relationships. In fact, they're very good at getting people to talk to them. They are seen as everyone's confidant. People come and talk to them readily. And part of what these type 1 people realize very quickly is that people are much more likely to talk to them, and they're much more likely to have influence on other people if the other people see them as being happy, trustworthy, capable, secure. A lot of those aspects, those traits, how they present those really have a lot to do with their own internal thinking. And so if they want to present themselves as positive, they go and think positive thoughts before they meet with people. And they are very good at presenting themselves as positive and trustworthy and a good confidant. and someone who has good sense and can deliver good practical advice. Those are all wonderful things for the type 1 person to do. And the type 1 person is actually often described as not only the confidant, but the perfect counselor. Think about what I've just said and how that fits into psychology. First of all, that's a huge chunk of social psychology. Influence, impression management, self-presentation, self-perception. All of that is very much tied into these type 1 kinds of people. And so are other things like emotional intelligence and appraisal theory. Therapeutically, it's very tied in with things like cognitive behavior therapy, choice theory and reality therapy, reframing. All of those are very type 1 kinds of activities. People with that orientation are typically very good at following a very simple CBT script and following it really, really well and getting a lot of gain from people in a very short time, because the people do feel like they're competent and understanding, and they find them very trustworthy. And those people, because they're very identified with their gut, they're able to execute that plan and keep moving and stay on track and not waver. And so there's a lot to be said for these type 1 kind of people. The downside of type 1 people is that they are very identified with their ego. And so the kinds of advice that they're giving people is very much on the order of improving their ego functioning. They can get people a certain distance, but they're not going to get them past that because they can't get themselves past that. They're identified with their own ego. For most people, that's helpful. The other downside of type 1 people is that because they're very introverted, at some point they start thinking that they just really would rather do without other people. And they suck into their own internal thinking. And they start thinking they're philosophers or something, and they spend all their time being alone and neglecting their relationships and focusing on what they think internally. And so a lot of times their relationships are not very deep and not very long lasting. Where they had started out with great promise, they don't ever get any deeper than the first date, and their relationships crap out. That's what a type 1 person is like. Now there's the type 2 therapist. And the type 2 therapist is actually just the opposite. They identify with their heart and they relate to other people with their gut. Our heart is values, it's depth, it's spirituality, it's meaning and purpose, and those kinds of very deep values. And so that's what they think is most real. That's what's most real about them, is their values and their meaning and their purpose. They understand people intuitively, and to assist them in their intuition, they use their own internal sensations, micro changes in how their heart feels, how their gut feels when they're around other people. Tell them a lot about what's going on with the other people. And so They understand people a lot of times better than the other people understand themselves. Certainly before the other person has realized something, a lot of times these type 2 people can feel it. Clearly, if you are a type 2 therapist, then you have a huge advantage over most people, and over type 1 therapists for that matter, depending on what it is you're trying to do with your clients. If you understand people's emotions before they do, and better than they do, and you have a real deep intuitive understanding of where people got off track and how they got stuck and how to get them unstuck, that's a huge advantage. And if you're identified with your heart, and one of your values is deep relationship and deep understanding of other people, then you have a huge advantage being able to just stay with people and take them deeper and deeper and deeper into relationship, which is the only thing that really cures people. And if you're identified with your heart, then you have a huge advantage in how far you can take people. If you think about spiritual practice, whether it's meditation or yoga or tai chi or whatever, all of those were developed to get people past their sensations, to get them out of their head, to get them past their ego, away from their stories, and to get them back into their heart. And if you're a type 2 therapist, you're already there. You started out there. And so your ability to take people into some very deep understandings of meaning and value and purpose is much, much greater than a type 1 therapist is. Now, there are downsides to being a type 2 therapist. Sometimes type 2 therapists come across as really flighty. They have lots of good understanding and good ideas, but they just don't put them into practice. They don't get stuff done. They have good ideas, but they just, when the rubber hits the road, they get distracted by bright, shiny objects and another great idea and something else to learn about. And so they never get as deep sometimes into fulfilling their own ability as they can. The other, sort of similar to the type 1, is that they start realizing, you know what, I'm an introvert and being around all these people kind of wears me out. The type 2's drawback is their own internal sensations, their own stories, their own emotionality. Their stories typically will be about how somebody told them to do something and shot them down when they were trying to live from their heart, and they can't decide whether to trust their heart or to trust their story. And so they get into a lot of internal conflict. They don't know what to do. That's why if you're a type 2 therapist, it's especially important that you learn to serve other people and not allow yourself to get sucked into your stories about how you're supposed to serve other people or how other people haven't ever served you or how you've been hurt. All of those are dead ends for you.